Why is there such a huge gap between what we think parenting will be and what it actually is?
If you call me every day at 9 a.m. when I just get back from getting my kids out the door, am I like happier than a non-parent? Probably not. But that's not the kind of happiness that parenting gives us.
What are the jobs of mums and dads now? What's a dad now he's no longer just a provider? What's a mum now that she often is?
When you look at this from a historical perspective, there's been a tremendous shift. Men are doing more care than they have done really since the Industrial Revolution.
Why, when we think having children will bring us closer together, does it so often push us apart? What am I supposed to teach or model for my children when I have no idea what the world is going to look like in 5 years' time?
Culture change is work too. Like, we have to put effort into it. We have to see ourselves as culture change activists.
Why did my parents have so much conviction about these things and I have absolutely none? Well, I don't know, but there are some really intelligent people all around the world who've been thinking about this stuff, and they are going to talk to me, and we might not answer all those questions every week, but if we listen to their ideas, maybe we can get some wisdom and some insight, and maybe most importantly, some perspective, and find out what it takes to be a happier parent. What happens to us when we start to look after children? Elissa Strauss's book, When You Care, The Unexpected Magic of Caring for Others, is an investigation into this massively overlooked element of the human experience. We talk about the neglected side of Darwinism, the fact that humans have evolved to look after other humans. We talk about happiness, and if does parenting make you happy is even the right question, which is great, but it did make me want to change the name of the podcast. We talk about meaning and wisdom and the difficulties we have in asking for help and offering help. My son was going through a difficult time when I recorded this, and this conversation came along at exactly the right moment for me, and it helped me so much, and I really hope it helps you guys too. So, yeah, full disclosure, I have not finished your book, and I really considered cancelling this because we're going through some stuff with my soon-to-be 12-year-old, and I'm really raw, and I've burst out crying twice reading your book in the last 2 days. And I was like, I'm just going to cancel this. I've got no ability to skim read, so I was like, I know I'm not going to get through it, but then I was actually like, it's also pertinent to what you're talking about that I was actually, this could be a really great conversation. I could characterize a lot of the books I've read by mothers as a kind of, I thought motherhood was going to be this, and I was completely taken aback by the loss of sense of self, by how hard it was, by the cost. Whereas actually you start from this really different place of, I know what's coming, and no, I'm not giving up me, I'm not giving up this. And that was fascinating. And I just wonder if you could talk about some of the feminist writings that kind of highlighted this thing to you.
I mean, I think in a way you started it, right? Like that, I feel like that is a lot of the writing that's out there. And I'm glad it's out there. I hate how much of there's this like zero-sum game environment with motherhood writing, that we're on teams. Do you like motherhood or you don't like motherhood? You know, are you this or you that? I don't think I also like fit on any team. So maybe that's why I really don't feel good about all these like teams or agendas. So I just want to start by, my approach with everything is very much yes and, as opposed to like, oh, we shouldn't have, it's really this, not that, So like, yes, motherhood can lead to a loss of self. Yes, mothers are not really supported in our culture. Yes, motherhood makes it harder sometimes, not always, but sometimes, to achieve other dreams or ambitions for women, and all that's true. And there was a lot of writing. There's still a lot of writing coming out along those lines today, particularly from women who identify as feminist and progressives or liberals. And I'm glad that writing is out there. My book isn't an argument against them. My book is someone who took in a lot of that writing when I became a mom for the first time. It's also, I kind of came of age with sex positive feminism. We'll use Sex in the City as the shorthand, right? What's a good life or meaningful life for the woman? And it's like having fun and working hard and having lots of sex, you know? And I appreciated that. Again, yes, and like I'm glad that I came of age in an era where I didn't feel like I had to only focus in my 20s on finding a husband and getting married, and I could have fun and explore my sexuality and who I am outside of that context. And then the second main wave of feminism that was kind of in the air when I became a mom was the lean in, or the girl boss feminism, and was really focused on corporate feminism. And again, yes, and you know, I think that when you look at the wealth of men in the world versus the wealth of women, you know, there were many flaws to how that played out, and I don't agree with everything that was said. But this overall idea that, like, as long as we're living in a capitalist world, like, I'm not against the idea that we need more women to work. So, you know, this yes and, but nowhere in that sex positive feminism, nowhere in that girl boss feminism, nowhere in that Rachel Cusk literary Brooklyn scene feminism was there much space for any really deep kind of creative, intellectual, philosophical curiosity in caring for a small child and being a parent or really being any kind of caregiver. That care, I felt like largely there was a lack of curiosity from the broader culture, but also a lack of curiosity within feminist circles about care.
Yeah, you said at one point that actually to say anything good about the experience, people will be like, you know, you're clearly a victim of patriarchy, or it's like Stockholm syndrome,
Right.
and it had that sort of negative connotation. Why did you choose to focus on care for the older generation as well? Because that's an interesting feature of the book, which I hadn't.
Yeah.
This podcast is about parenting, but as my friend said to me the other week, that other one is in the post to all of us.
Oh
It's
yeah.
coming.
Or the letters, you know, arrived yesterday and the corners are starting to peel off the envelope, you know. Um, you know, as I became interested in my own experience as a parent, I became like it quickly kind of broadened to being interested in this core fundamental type of human relationship that is a care relationship, that is one human being being dependent on another human being. And I saw how it wasn't just parenthood that's kind of been erased or been ignored. It was all kind of dependency relationships. And they're so core to being a human. I mean, you know, quite literally, we would not survive as a species without them. And just like no one was really talking about them. And so while there are many differences, of course, between raising a child and caring for a parent with dementia or someone with a terminal illness, I still think that the kind of collective value of that work and the individual experience of that work has some interesting overlap that I wanted to explore.
You point out the research that has been done. Let's stick to children for the moment. Is all very much about what the effects of caring on the child are, and very little focuses on the effects of care on us, the people who are doing it. And what have those effects been on you? You go first.
Gosh, oof. It's funny because I get a Google alert about motherhood, and it's so often people use the sentence X finally speaks the truth about motherhood, and so often it's the truth about early motherhood. It's the truth about the first year, and now almost 13 years into it, it's like so many truths, right? What so many effects, to get back to your question. I think for me, like the main ways that parenthood have really challenged me and continue to challenge me is in really understanding, and again, this sounds so simple in many ways, but is also just one of the hardest things I think for humans to kind of wrap our head around, really getting that other people are different than me. And of course, we know that on a surface level, we all know that. Of course, we know that. But actually, with the human mind, that's a really hard thing to understand and accept. And boy, oh boy, like you look at the political culture right now. It's clearly a really hard thing for people to understand and accept, and people just think the other side's absolutely evil because we really just it's kind of imagine that someone may have a different perspective is really hard for us. And so for me, my kids raising them has just been a nonstop kind of practice of really trying to accommodate another subjectivity, to really understand that they're just their own person experiencing this life on their own terms. And underneath that, for me, it's really comes down to cultivating true attention and the ability to listen. Again, surface level, we all know what these mean. They seem kind of basic and straightforward, but really listening to another, really trying to pay attention to them is wicked hard, you know, and it's ongoing for me. I haven't nailed it. So I think in
there's
terms
something
of
in that of like
yeah.
that difference between yes, knowing something and actually experiencing it and fighting to kind of do it in a way that is often painful and frustrating, and that is the difference between intelligence or knowing something and wisdom. We're talking
Yeah.
about wisdom, aren't we? That can
Yes,
only be
exactly.
gained through some kind of pain often, I think.
Yes.
That's
Yeah. And I feel like people often, you know, they're like, oh, your book is about the joy of parenting. And I'm like, yes, I'm a little bit, but it's really about the meaning making experience that is parenting, right? Like the wisdom, we make meaning through this experience, right? We gain wisdom through this experience. And I think as part of that whole process of cultivating real attention, listening, receptivity, finding yourself in that too, because when you're listening to your child, it can't like it's not then you just do whatever the child needs. Then you go back to yourself and you try to find a version of care that is honest to like what you think and what you need as a parent and also who this child is and what this child needs, right? It's just that dance. And underneath that is entering into a mindset that's really process oriented and not outcome oriented. And that's another very hard thing in our culture. We're like utterly, you know, outcome oriented species at this moment in time, generally speaking. And care just yanks that rug from right under our feet. And to focus on outcomes, as I'm sure you experience as a parent, is just like a you know fool's errand. It's ongoing. It's a process, and you keep at it.
basically it's like the most humbling experience of my life to realize that I can't make someone do something.
Yeah.
And I didn't like God. That sounds arrogant, doesn't it? When you're like, I always thought I could make people do what I want, but to know that I can't make this child do something that I think is in its best interests, I have no way of doing it, and I can't control outcome. Like it's so humbling, and we don't have the words. You know, like when people are like, oh, how's it going? I'm like, I want to say amazing, wonderful, awesome, like, but in the, you know, it is amazing, it's full of wonder, it's full of awe, but then it's not positive. I
Right.
don't have the words, you know.
I mean, that's like exactly what I hope my book would start us on the journey of doing. Not have all the words, but like create, like widen the aperture on parenting, on caregiving overall. So we don't have to use these like kind of like cliche terms to talk about it. You know, I feel like the language is so lacking because we really still don't have a shared understanding of how big care is. It's so big.
Could you just read that section from your book saying, so I hate to focus too much on happiness.
This is in my chapter on Karen, the psychological kind of transformations it could bring about in us. And I just want to also situate it. Like when I became a parent, there was a lot of talk of does parenting make you happier? Like that was the big question. And I don't really think that's the question to ask. And this is what this passage addresses. Still, I hate to focus too much on happiness because I don't think the kind of day to day, footloose and carefree cheerfulness that researchers measure is the key ingredient to the psychological well being that can come from care. The quote unquote good is something more complicated than happiness. deeper, richer, and longer lasting, a broad and jagged-edged brushstroke to happiness's straight and simple line. It's what happened to Eric, who's a dad, an army veteran I write about earlier in this chapter, and me. The way care elicited a more honest relationship with our lives and our feelings, disrupting the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves and pushing us to write new, more accurate ones. I know caregivers for whom care helped them see how productivity obsessed they were, or how much they oriented their life around their public image and not what they really wanted. For others, care helped them see that they were better at intimacy than they thought, opening up their ability to connect with their adult family and friends. Sometimes this being face-to-face with another's vulnerability on a daily basis, combined with the vulnerability one feels as a result of the stress of care, allowed them to reveal, maybe even for the first time, that they don't have it all together. They too are incomplete. It's okay.
Just like amazing, I've got nothing to add to that. It just kind of really put into words what I was trying to say to my friends when they were asking me how's it going, and just not being able to say that. And it was just so wonderful to read that. And I think it was Eric's story that made me burst out in tears today. And it was something. Eric is an army veteran who has a kid on an army base and gives up his army career to look after the kid. And what he realizes is a lot of his friends are kind of taking PTSD medication, that if he stayed in the military he wouldn't need the medication, because you're always moving forward, you react, you move forward. And it was like the act of looking after children forcing him to kind of stop and be that. It brings us face to face with a lot of pain, I think. That like I have to sit, and we do so much in our lives and in our culture to just never feel that discomfort. We've got so many options to get around it. Whereas if we really turn into, I'm going to say caring for children, we'll come on to adults later, there's something in it where we're forced to get to grips with it. Start shuffling it around,
Yeah. And, and I think it also brings up stuff from our childhood too, right? So it's the actual act of care in that moment. And it's also can be for many a reevaluation of the stories they've always told themselves about their lives. It's big stuff, huge stuff.
Let's talk about men. You have a wonderful chapter about men. It's a very, there's a lot of anger out there towards men at the moment, and it's it's very, very kind. Yeah, just talk to me a bit about that. I don't know what specific question I've got. What would you like to say?
Yeah. I mean, my chapter is less angry than a lot of a lot of the writing about men out there. I think it's just a personality thing. If I don't see that the revolution is going to be one. Oh, anger is an important tactic, but it can't be the only one. I also think that, and there's a great quote from a wonderful historian of the family in America, Stephanie Kuntz, in this chapter, and she essentially says, like, if you're the working mom and you come home after a long day, it's up to you to figure out what the kid needs for Spirit Week and figure out dinner that night, and your husband's just rolling in and exercising and not paying any attention. Like, she understands why that mom is really pissed. And when you look at this from a historical perspective, there's been a tremendous shift. Men are doing more care than they have done really since the Industrial Revolution, when families used to live in family units, agricultural lifestyles, which everyone kind of pitched in for everything. There was less division of labor when it came to care. But really, since industrialization, since Victorian times, it's become something that women do. And whether it's hired help or moms, and men didn't do it. And we've really started to see just a massive shift from my grandfather to my father. Huge shift. My grandfather was come home at the end of his workday, go to the study, nobody bother him. He's going to read. That's back then when they had evening papers, right? He's going to read the evening paper. He needs his peace. And, maybe you'll exchange a few words over dinner, but that's it for dad for the week. My dad came home from work. He didn't do as much domestic labor as my mom, but he was involved and played with us, right? We had the fun dad, maybe, a couple, basically 1.5 generations ago. And then today's dad, they're not doing as much as mom, but they're not just the fun dads anymore. And there's plenty of data showing up. And also, I feel like anecdotally, at least in most of the places I've been, like you just walk the streets and you see a lot of men pushing strollers. I see a lot of dads noticing a diaper's full and going and change it. Again, I'm not saying we're close to parity, but dads are really doing more than they have in literally since the Industrial Revolution. So I wanted to look at.
I feel like they want to as well.
Yes.
The problem I see men facing in my peer group isn't a bunch of men who don't want to care because they think caring's bad or beneath them. It's a bunch of men who want to, but they don't understand the mental load. They can't quite see what it is that they're not doing. They're face to face with maternal gatekeeping and a lot of anxiety.
Yeah.
And they probably quit too easily because they've always been told it's not really their thing.
Yeah.
So it's a really different problem. We don't think care's rubbish. We don't.
Right. And right. So we need to look at the problem through that lens, right? This is what I found and this is what you've experienced. Maybe the dad doesn't agree with every single thing the mom chooses, right? With how a birthday party should look, but also moms could learn from dads on that front. They're saddled with so many fewer expectations of perfectionism in parenting that, let's let the dads plan the birthday parties. Let's see that it's okay if, the plates and the napkins don't match.
The first time I came across your work, you were doing a Facebook Live and you were telling a story of how your husband had tried to cook something, like something kind of Jewish, and he'd really messed it up. And you were like, oh, God.
I gave him Hanukkah one year as his. I wrote about it. It was an experiment for this paper I was writing for at the time. I'm going to give him just the whole job, like soup to nuts, as they say, soup to latkes. And yeah, he chose to make lentil soup with latkes, which to me is not a traditional and odd and starchy choice, But we survived it. It was good, and yeah, so I've written a lot about maternal gatekeeping. I'm very willing to own that I definitely have stopped my husband from being more involved sometimes as a parent caregiver because I didn't like the outfit he put on the kids. And I was worried that we go to synagogue and they're, that shirt had a stain right there. And how could he put them in a, stained shirt? And, he looked at it, he thought it was a very small stain and it was a printed shirt. For him, he just didn't see it the same. And so I really think it's a conversation we need to have. Again, if we can do it with love and tenderness to both sides, because there's a good reason women gatekeep, because we're just more judged when the kid has the stained shirt, when people come over to our house for a holiday and the menu's a little odd.
Is Elissa okay? Did you see the kid's shirt? Do you think she's okay?
Right. Exactly. So if we could just have this conversation with open mind and good faith to both parties, I think we could get somewhere. And I think, right, overall, you see, and again, plenty of research showing that, as you mentioned, it's not just that dads want to care to help moms. They want to care because they really do see it as a potential path to meaning in their lives. And as more and more people kind of realize that work will not, give us everything we need in terms of meaning and purpose and community, care is another avenue that really can benefit men. And I really do think more and more men get this. They just need the confidence to do it. They need the time to do it. They need the structural support, like paternity leave, to do it. And they need some, openness from the moms to let them in.
I mean, you touch on another element in the book, which I think is really interesting. You talk about this congressman who is a linebacker. I'm not American. I imagine they're big. Is that what linebackers are? They're the big ones. But, this kind of super masculine sport. And he talks about, this buys him permission to talk about these more nurturing issues, to be, to do a lot more with his child. And I think we have the same thing going on for us with work and meaning, where we have this message very clearly coming through from people who climbed the wrong mountain is the expression. They've been enormously successful and they're like, I got to the top and there was nothing there. But I think for men, we're like, well, that's okay for you to say that because no one can doubt your competence. You've already done it. So you're all right, fine. You can go and be a family man now. And we still have that kind of question mark.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And, it's true that I get very excited when very successful men really own fatherhood. One example is Alexis Ohanian, who was a co-founder of Reddit. He's married to Serena Williams. He's a high-profile guy. He has a podcast called Business Dad. Spoke to very accomplished men about fatherhood. And that does so much work of integrating fatherhood into a kind of measure or story of success for men. But you're right that it's like that's only halfway there. If you have to win at the traditional masculine stuff first, and only then can you publicly embrace fatherhood. And gosh, I feel like it's people like you and some other men that are really starting to take on this topic that can help break that other ground and do this work that I'm hoping to do in my book and kind of all my speaking and activism overall is changing the narrative around care to something that's a mountain that we see as equally meaningful to climb.
Does the raising of the status of something have to involve money? It's a really blunt question, but tell me the answer.
I feel like I'll do like it doesn't hurt in like an old New York City accent, right? It doesn't hurt. I wish it didn't, and I don't think it's only money that raises the status. But I do think that care systemically being left out of all of our measures of economic growth and wealth doesn't help us see the collective value of care. And if we see the collective value of care, we internalize it, and then we can see more clearly the personal value of care.
How do we put a financial label on what it's worth? What's really interesting for where I am with my youngest at the moment, which is really hard to get him to go to school at the moment. So we're doing this kind of juggle in our heads of actually what is my care worth in terms of resources? Because my care time is money, is time that I'm not working. Children need our time, but actually at some point it would be really good to have some resources to give them as well. It's also so messy and not instantly rewarding, right?
Yeah.
If you've done if you've written your piece and you've pressed send and you've hit the deadline, there's that dopamine thing. It's like, I took this morning off so I can walk my son to school, and we went the long way around and I don't know if that's achieved anything for him. I've got no kind of marker. Do you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, that gets back to what I was saying at the beginning of it's like care's a process. It's not really outcome oriented. There's certain outcomes, and you could, if your son's grades are down in math and you help him at night and you get a tutor and his grades go up, you could be like, oh, X plus Y equals Z to extend the math metaphor.
Yeah, but they're rare, aren't they?
They're so rare. And it's also a long game. Like maybe you were disservicing him by giving him too much attention. You know what I mean? That could almost backfire in a long,
I did it all
over
for
time.
him. Yeah.
Right, because then he wasn't really learning anymore. He needs to learn how to actually learn in the classroom. So who knows? Care just defies so much of our understanding of what a good life is, what a productive life is. And there's so much unlearning that has to happen to really wrap our heads around it. Because it's love and it's work, it's heaven and it's hell, it's productive and it's a mess. It's so many things at once. And to really try to think of it, I do think, in the United States in particular, parents are just so under-supported. We don't even have paid parental leave here. Childcare can make you broke. It's just, I know it's not that much better in every way in the UK either.
It's so nice to be speaking to someone from a country where it's slightly worse. I
Yeah.
can't, my Schadenfreude is just like whenever I speak to
Yeah.
the Americans, I'm like, oh God, we're better than
Right.
someone. But no, yeah, after you, we suck the most. But
Yeah. So, I mean, imagine though if you really did have a little more support, if aftercare at school, because obviously the school day is the broken concept for working parents, doesn't actually work. In America, we have these 3-month long summer breaks, that you have to plug in and pay thousands per kid to get them somewhere doing something. Like imagine if I do think like having broader structural support is something that we really would internalize. So when you're walking an extra lap to help ease the transition for your child to school, if you were like, and society invest in this because we all understand this is deeply important, like it would trickle in, maybe some people more than others, and maybe it wouldn't be front of mind, but there would be with the collective sense of responsibility and purpose. I think we would have just more individual sense of responsibility and purpose about like, oh, this is important. We do this. This is what humans do for others. We give them good care. We're dependent on this.
yeah, I mean, we don't want to overuse the word happiness, and I loved what you said about this whole thing being more jagged than happiness. But you do ask the question in the book of when people are saying parenting makes them unhappy, is it the parenting itself or the fact that there's no support and there's not enough money and they're stressed about all these other things? You give this analogy of the soup. It's like, it's not the making of the soup or the feeding of the soup. It's the fact that the cooking of the soup every day can make you go broke. And that there's never a second for you to sit down and eat the soup yourself. It's
Right.
these things that surround it. It's not the act of care a lot of the time that breaks us.
Right. There's two really big studies that compare, one's focused just on Europe and another's compares countries around the world. And it found that the happiness gap between parents and non-parents disappears. That parents are just as happy or unhappy, right, as non-parents when parents are really supported by a government, when they have paid leave, when there's childcare options, when they could afford their lives. I mean, the list goes on, right? But I think that piece, when we're talking about population-wide looks at parental happiness, like the money and just kind of economic security and stability is the difference. And then we're talking about our individual lives, right? It's, like this is where the happy question is just feels off to me. If you call me every day at 9 a.m. when I just get back from getting my kids out the door, am I like happier than a non-parent? Probably not, but that's not the kind of happiness right, that parenting gives us. And there are moments for many people in their parenting experience during which they're like explicitly really not happy. When a child is going through a hard time, parents aren't really happier at that moment. But again, that's where when we get into wisdom producing, meaning making, other directedness, it's not that quick hit. It's a long-term investment.
Yeah, and I think maybe just a complete change on the way you look at the human experience. I think I struggled a little bit with your use of the word meaning. I think there's something that we can do where we attach all our meaning to our children, and it's not a good thing. But actually, through this thing of becoming carers and doing all the things you said at the beginning of, genuine empathy, genuinely realizing that other people see the world through a different set of eyes and kind of really on a daily basis struggling to get your head around that, we can start to understand that community, caring for older people, all those things will have their benefits, and not just our children will give our life meaning, but the act of care will give meaning.
Yes, exactly. I think that's exactly it. It would be too much pressure on our kids for them to be the sole meaning in our lives, right? And I have many other ways in which I pursue meaning. It's again where I don't like fit into these easy Instagram mom categories. I mean, I always worked, I formula fed my kids. I've always been an equal partner with my husband. So it's not as though I've dedicated, when I say I really love being a mom, that doesn't then mean that I've spent all day, every day being a mom. I do lots of other things, which are a huge part of my identity. For me, the key here isn't just, and you know what, and again, if that's meaningful and that's what works for someone else, like great, because we're all allowed to live the lives we want to live. But for me, the key here isn't so much that kids are my only source of meaning. It's exactly what you said. It's that this experience of caring for my kids has led to revelations and deeper understandings of myself and life that then bleed into my writing work, bleed into my friendships, right? Have this larger ripple effect kind of into all sorts of areas in my life and deepened the meaning overall. And that's really where I think like the heart of it is.
And I think it's interesting that actually you can't have that fullness of experience without support.
No.
Because, talking about, yes, men are unquestionably wanting to care more and doing much, much better than ever before. I think, going back to that soup analogy, what we need to realize is that, like, when women are doing all the domestic stuff, there's no room for anything else.
Yeah.
Like, me making my kids a meal is brilliant and wonderfully fulfilling most of the time, but that's because I'm not doing everything else.
Right.
If I was doing everything else and I was doing that every night, it would not be any of those things. It would be shit. So
Absolutely.
we need that support to make this the experience that you're talking about in the book.
Absolutely. I mean, this is, again, when we keep the aperture small or narrow on care, we see it as this simple thing. It's like it's locked away in the home. Women have done it. It just somehow it kept happening, and we didn't have to pay attention to it. We didn't have to support it. And that's just like a completely wrong understanding of care. And that's the understanding we've had for really, at least since the 1950s. And when we really see care as this like big, thorny experience, it makes perfect sense that you need support. Care is hard, and there's such thing as too much care. And when it's too much care, care can absolutely be a burden. And we kind of afford this understanding to so many other things in our lives, right? Like if someone runs marathons, right, and that's like this big part of their lives, we understand that it's hard. We understand that there's such a thing as too much training. We understand that, a knee can get tweaked and they need rest. We understand that people can love their jobs and get burnt out at their jobs, right? Like we have this understanding in
You said
so
how many war movies have I had to sit through that demand that I can see something is painful and terrible and at the same time massively kind of
Exactly.
life changing with
And so can we just start seeing care that way, right? Can we see parenting that way? Because that's what it is. And it's, you look at the human history going back, and it's just completely basically novel. Our idea that we're supposed to care on our own, locked inside our homes without support. It's miserable. It's miserable for everyone. It's miserable for the kids. It's miserable for the parents. And gosh, and there's so many little ways this could be different. One of my friends has just moved. Her apartment caught on fire, which she did not want to move. The building caught on fire, not her actual apartment, so she had to move last minute. And she moved to this complex of apartments, condos in Berkeley that it's like all these kind of units spread out on this big, beautiful grass lot. And now all the kids just play. Now her son, he moved there a month ago. He spends all day outdoors playing with these other kids all day. If he needs a snack, he can stop in someone else's house. And it's just like, gosh, imagine if we had built so many people's like communities and houses like that, where we really shared land. This wasn't the kind of mid-century privatized capitalist notion of wealth and homeownership and a nice space, but these like we can be the ones to start pushing and reimagining society, starting with the way our houses are structured, to really start building this kind of shared care mentality and move in that direction, because we really need it.
I guess I want to suggest that there will probably be a cost to that, and that I don't mean a financial cost. I mean that we've ended up with our individualized society because we want it and we like it. And it's really interesting that you use the example in the book of the Israeli artist who grew up on the kibbutz, where they have shared sleeping arrangements for all the children. And I've got a couple of friends who are like, my parents grew up with that, and oh, you know, it's amazing, and all the kids sleep together because that's everyone's responsibility. But really interesting that the artist in your book did not want to replicate that. And actually, when you talk to these people, I'm always like, well, come on, what's the downside? And they're like, well, you've got no autonomy on a kibbutz. You're not allowed to leave, right? You're not allowed your own money. And again, like communities near where I live, amazing, like Indian families, all their kids are out on the street from a really young age because it's multi-generational and they know everyone on every road. But talking to my Indian friend, she's like, there's a different thing that comes with being that part of community to do with shame and not being able to live your own life, and you're not allowed to date that person, you can't do that job, what will everyone think? So I'm just wary of saying that there's a perfect system.
No, I don't think there's a perfect system, and I'm glad you brought this up. Probably 7 years ago now, I wrote an article in which it was at the time when everyone was reading how to parent like a French parent, how to parent like, Scandinavian parent. There was all those books in America were very popular. And I did an article ask immigrants in America what they liked about parenting American style, because, they like everyone was just shitting on what it meant to parent like American. And I heard from two different immigrants, but, one particularly an Indian woman, how in India, like her son has some learning disabilities and there was so much stigma and shame and everyone had an opinion. And it's so freeing here in America where she could like pursue, she felt like she didn't have all the aunties breathing down her back and she could actually pursue what she needed for her, what she thought her kid needed without all that noise and without all that judgment. And I think, so I'm glad you mentioned this, and absolutely, interesting that some of your friends enjoyed that experience on the kibbutz, because everyone I know who grew up in one of these like extreme kibbutzim where you have the children's houses are traumatized by it. So I think what's neat about my friend's new apartment situation, right, just to kind of stick it to this one example, it's a private space. You have your own private little backyard area too, but you also have the collective space. So it's not the all in. And I think that there's a way we can learn from the past and try to create a balance. And, it's the work of a lifetime to really know how much of the individual to protect and how much you want to, kind of be part of a community. I don't think anyone's going to ever nail it, but I think we could take 3 steps in that direction without going fully to like the full commune lifestyle.
So let's talk about that tension between the individual and us as kind of collective animals, caring animals in Darwin. You're really interesting about that, and I think we end up with quite a skewed version of Darwin.
I read this book about Darwin by one of his great, let's stop there, it might be one or more, one less, grandsons, about Darwin's relationship with his daughter, Anne, who Darwin described as his favorite daughter, and she died when she was 10. And I read it very early on in kind of conceiving this book and researching this book, and it really just like ignited my thinking on this so much. And the story with Darwin, and it's covered in detail in the chapter on evolution and care, is that, a lot of us, right, the kind of the first thing most of us would say if someone said explain what Darwin's work, we would say survival of the fittest. Like that's kind of the popular understanding of Darwin's evolutionary theory. And it's not inaccurate exactly, but it's really incomplete. And we love survival of the fittest as a culture because it really fits into capitalist ideas. It really fits into patriarchal ideas. It's competition, it's dominance. If someone's not making it, that's fine. Let them kind of, die out in evolutionary terms because the strong will survive and we want humans to be strong. Darwin didn't take it to that kind of social and financial level, but broadly speaking, that's part of how species evolved, right? The strong lived on and the weak died out. And, very important, and Darwin was equally as invested in social cooperation, empathy, sympathy, and care as kind of equally essential to species survival. And what I love about the Darwin story is that he didn't just kind of come up up with this as a theory. He had his own deeply profound care experience that led him to it. And it was the loss of his daughter, Anne. And it was his grief for her that he could not, as any parent could imagine, did not just go away even decades after. And he thought and thought and thought. And I want to add also Darwin, as were many Victorian men, actually quite involved fathers. I'm not saying the patriarchy didn't exist back then, but there was a sense that was common for at least I think wealthier Victorian men to be quite emotionally connected and playful with their kids. So Darwin thought and thought and thought, why am I still sad about this daughter dying? And basically came to the conclusion that it's the parental instinct, it's our instinct, like deeply woven instincts to love our kids, that it's essential that we have that, because it's from there that we then kind of learn to care for other people and want to cooperate and live in more collective units that are good for humans, and not just be totally self-centered and care about just our own personal survival, but really let that spread out. And it's a very touching story. And I think it's the other side of evolution that we just don't talk about enough.
Yeah. So, and your book really draws attention to that we've focused on the survival of the fittest, but actually the thing that has made humans different to other animals is actually our ability to work together in large groups. Yeah. And that's why we're the species that dominates the globe. And we haven't really focused on that. And I think what you say at one point is, it's something like, care isn't just a manifestation of this ability for us to work socially. It's the reason it exists.
Yeah.
The reason we have this is to kind of keep our kids and other people's kids and then other people alive.
Yeah.
Because that's what keeps the tribe alive.
Right.
And it is the human experience.
Exactly. It's not an accessory. It's not an optional add-on. It's at the core.
So, what do we do? We've mentioned, taking a different view on our living arrangements. There's also something in your book about, I think, we talked about it in terms of men and work and trying to change what ambition means. Yeah. That really spoke to me. My dad said to me at one point, a very successful man, my dad, he goes, I don't understand why you don't have my ambition. I was like, I've just got different ambitions.
Yeah.
It's not that I'm not ambitious. So, how do we change that story about really what success is for humans?
I think
quickly.
I mean, yeah, exactly. I think it starts with storytelling. It starts with sharing our own stories, and it starts with seeing our experiences as parents and caregivers as interesting and important as they are, and presenting them that way to the world. And, culture change's messy, but it does happen. It really does happen. I'm already seeing it happen. So each and every one of us who parents, when someone asks you how it's going, don't jump to like, oh, you'll be bored, or, oh, I'm sorry, I've been talking about this too long. No, let's all cut that out of our vocabulary immediately starting today. Because that's right. We kind of walk around the world like, you don't want to hear about my kids. And that's because what could be more boring, right, than hearing about.
Yeah, that's so true. It's actually, I have no interest in your work stories, mate. I don't quite understand what you do. I'm much more interested in the other humans that you're kind of working out this stuff with. It's much more interesting.
Yeah, and like you're raising humans. Like, that's crazy. That's interesting. So I think we just start by getting totally over the fact that we're just prattling on when we're talking about parenthood, right? That it's all just trivial and boring, and that it's better to like cut to something else that matters more. I think that's the first thing. And I think the other things that really feed into all of our blind spot towards care are our fear of weakness, death, vulnerability. And I think a real twofer for the care revolution is asking for help as parents. I think the more we ask for help, we get the help, and that's nice. We like help, right? So there's an immediate positive benefit. And we just we normalize the fact that we all need help. we hopefully invite the person we're asking for help to then ask us for help for something. All that vulnerability and all that tapping into the collective, I think will ultimately lead again to this culture change we need to have a society where caregivers actually feel supported and feel okay about not being able to do it all themselves, because they really shouldn't be able to. Nobody can.
I find it sometimes hard to ask for help, not through kind of bravado, but because the words aren't there. It can be quite hard to know what we need in
Yeah.
any given moment.
Yeah. No, it's true. I mean, there's small things like, just ask for your kids to get a ride to something, or ask, oh,
Yeah.
I'm or can you just take my kid for an hour or two? I have some friends that we basically have open house policies if it's possible. Like, your kid's always welcome at my house and my kid's always welcome at their
I'm wondering
house.
about the opposite of that. I'm wondering about offering specific help. Because I think one of the things we do is we're like, oh, can I do anything? Nah.
Yeah, no, no,
Whereas,
that's
can I give
exactly.
your kid a lift? Has it got any clubs this week on what, like, I think that's really my piano teach no, my kid's piano teacher, who I'm also like mates with, was like, do you want me to talk to your son? And I was like, that's so nice. Maybe I'll
Yeah.
find out. But it was this
Yeah.
really specific offer that I thought was just gorgeous in that moment. Whether or not my
Yeah.
son went for it, it was kind of specific. And I wonder if we need to offer help, specific help
Yes.
more.
I'm all for that too. I think offer help, offer specific help. I have one friend who's so good at this. She always has been. She lived through something really awful. Her father was murdered when she was 21, and it just led her to knowing what people need during impossible moments. And even when she lives far away from me, if she knows I'm going through a hard time, I'll get, $75 gift card to an online grocer in my inbox. And it's like, I think we're also worried about overstepping. And it's like, no one's really mad when you overstep to try to help them. So it's just, just keep asking. It's not going to bother someone. And no, if it maybe, if it does, they'll let you know. But if they're saying yes often enough, they're probably appreciating it. So I think it's like, can we have this more collective approach to our kids? And can we also let go as parents? I think is the other piece, right? Of when our kids at that other person's house, like the rules are probably different. The vibe is probably different. It's good for the kids. Your kids, if it's, even if it's, as long as they're not really in danger, let go, let your kids be somewhere else. And
There's a theme.
also,
There's a theme here, isn't there? That all this good stuff is a little bit hard, and it requires us to do something that we feel a little bit about. With asking for help, offering help. You know, parenting in this way where we can't control everything. Like these things demand something from our humanity that's just not that easy.
it's
That's why it results in something special.
yes. Well, it's interesting because I do think the care crisis is so bound up in the loneliness crisis and also how people just aren't members of clubs and civic organizations. People aren't as religious. They don't go to houses of worship anymore. Because I think a lot of my best care relationships, and when I say that, I mean like families that I can kind of have that full trust. It's like, if your kid's at my house and your kid has a tantrum, I'm fine with it. I'm not judging you. Like, I
Mm.
love you. It's fine. You don't have to worry about how your kid behaves in my house. Those kind of relationships and vice versa I have mostly through people I know through my synagogue, because I feel like we're part of this kind of organization together. What I'm really trying to say here is I get it. It is hard because a lot of us aren't in kind of groups of organized groups where we build up the trust to then let go as parents and drop the kids off without thinking twice and not feeling embarrassed if the kid refuses the dinner or the kid acts out. And it takes a lot of work to get back to that, but considering
And
how
it
lonely
takes
and
us
isolated and stressed we all are, like we need to try.
it takes us right back to the introduction of your book, where you're sitting in the restaurant and you can see this group of mums with young kids, and through your head it's like, oh, I couldn't possibly join that group. They'll judge me for not breastfeeding and having a stroller and kind of all these things. And then later in the book, you're like, oh, I see an example of mums doing that and looking after each other's kids and with no judgment. But it's chimpanzees.
Yeah,
Yeah. But
totally.
still, it's possible. And actually, it's part of our animal brain that can do that. It's our
Yeah.
human brain that gets in the way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's just, it takes a few people to be the ones that stick their neck out, I think, in any community. And I think then other people jump on board, and then they're like, oh, I guess this could be okay. So if to whatever degree anyone has it in them to be the one that offers help, asks for help, make it clear in any way possible that however you parent, however I parent's okay, however your kids behave is okay. They're children, this like they're just children. It's again, it's culture change. It's if I think I'll say this, like we view activism as work, right? If like you want to change a policy, you have to go lobby, you have to protest, you have to sign a petition. Culture change is work too. Like we have to put effort into it. We have to see ourselves as culture change activists, and I think if we can see it that way and we understand this isn't going to happen probably organically, but if we invest a little in our relationships to moving the world or moving our community in this direction of real collective, like we can do it, but it's work and it might be uncomfortable.
Mm. One of the thoughts that I had whilst reading your chapter on men is that I've so there's a parents group near me, a WhatsApp group, and it was for my area and it was for mums, and there was this kind of massive argument that they were going to change it from mums to parents. And my friend, the author and journalist Melissa Hoggenboom, and she was like, there's been this massive row. Are we going to change it to be kind of for parents from mums? And we've changed it, and no dads have joined. And I was like, she told me this 3 times, and I was like, oh, so are you saying I should join the group? She's like, yes, you should join the group. And it took me like, I was like, right, yeah, sorry, of course. I'm doing this podcast. I talk about this stuff all the time. But it just hadn't occurred to me. But it's like, it's doing that extra thing. And then it's
Yeah.
really interesting on the group. You see mums building these networks, doing all this research, just mums doing all this
Yeah.
stuff.
But no,
And
it's like you get
it's
on
time for
there.
us to do it as dads. It
Yeah.
really is.
And again, I get it. Like, if you're a dad, yes, they just changed the name to parents, but this has been thus far the culture of this space is, even if it's a virtual space, right, is a mom space. So it's like to jump in as a dad, that's not going to be something a lot of men are comfortable doing. But culture change can happen. Like, you start it. You recruit one dad that, you see someone with some opening, you recruit one more dad. And then there's the tipping point. It's like we have to fight to get to the tipping point when then suddenly the dads feel like it's okay to do it. And then everyone does it.
Elissa's book is When You Care, The Unexpected Magic of Caring for Others. Elissa is a really brilliant contributor on Substack and is on Instagram as Elissa Avery. You can find the podcast on Instagram and TikTok and Substack at Be a Happier Parent. And full videos are available on my YouTube channel, Alex in Dadland. If you want to support the podcast, please head to our Patreon page. I look forward to seeing you all next week.